For more on this story, we're joined by the aptly named Mahsa Alimardani, senior researcher at human rights organization Article 19. She's also a PhD candidate at the Oxford Internet Institute. Thank you so much for joining us, Mahsa. In terms of the concerning narratives which have emerged in your line of work since Mahsa Amini's death, what have you seen?
It's been a really unprecedented year. I work for a freedom of expression organization, and one of the things that we always turn to are, the red lines that Iranians have to follow and the self-censorship that's often used. And what we have seen is this true withdrawal of barriers of self-censorship when it comes to expression in protests on the streets or expression online, because protests aren't just the protest gatherings on the streets, but oftentimes it is very much defiance and outspokenness online. And so this is one of the things that I have been following, which is brutal repression and crackdown against protests, against dissent, against any form of expression that the regime does not allow, has been met with continued defiance. And on today, on the day of the anniversary, while we might not be seeing hundreds and thousands as one expects during an uprising, there have been pockets we have been seeing all throughout today. In Karaj this morning, there was a pocket of protests with chants of people saying they will take Iran back. Of course, these might be limited in the length, in the scope, but this really has been the continuance of this movement, which is appearing in different shapes and forms as they continue chanting for women, life, freedom, and oftentimes chanting for the removal and end to the Islamic Republic of Iran.
And now you've obviously made some recommendations based on what you've seen, but do you think there's likely to be any kind of mentality shift in our lifetime?
Well, I mean, it really depends on the different variables at play. This past year has seen a lot of pressure on the international community to, leverage relationships with the Islamic Republic in various ways to stop the human rights abuses. I mean, back in November, we saw a historic United Nations special session to create a fact-finding mission to take stock and account for what the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the human rights situation in Iran called possible crimes against humanity, in terms of what the regime did in killing hundreds, torturing and arresting thousands since Mahsa Amini's death on this day last year and the uprising that followed. The regime has been following, and we can tell by the way that they try to deny what's been happening, the way that they have been pushing back against these narratives. We saw loud proclamations by the regime to say that the morality police was coming, the so-called morality police was being dismantled, but the brutalization and policing of women and new laws criminalizing women's bodies and women's right to autonomy have continued to come out of this regime. And so there has been a PR effort somewhat by the regime to show the world that things aren't as bad as it seems. Meanwhile, they are still quietly trying to recoup and ensure that, women do not make the progress that they have been making. Although it's hard really to go back to what things were like, before September 16, 2022, because this barrier, as I said, of self-censorship, of fear, really has been withdrawn. And so it really is a combination of what kind of boundaries the regime will have in terms of continuing to persecute, continuing to murder, harass, and torture folks. And, we have been seeing this continuance. Just 2 days ago, we had another Iranian Kurdish person in Tehran murdered for protests on the streets. His name was Hamed Bagheri. On the eve of the anniversary, they killed him on the streets again. We've been seeing mass roundups of families of the victims that had been killed this past year. So this this repression has continued, it is a matter of what the international community will be doing to pressure the regime, because of course the regime does need, sanctions relief. They do need economic support, and they rely on trade relationships and allies all throughout the world. And what kind of global impact there can be to let them know that, this impunity and lack of accountability for their crimes cannot continue.
Mahsa Alimardani, thank you so much for your insight. That's Mahsa Alimardani talking about Mahsa Amini's death 1 year on. She's the senior researcher at human rights organization, Article 19.
Thank you.